And we're at the 104th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're happy to be here again. We've got Leif joining us. And Leif has been on the podcast before, great supporter, and we're happy to have him. We're going to talk about multiple different things. We've been out for a couple of weeks doing some trainings and other things. So if we look a little fatigued on camera, it's because we've been on camera for the last, I don't know how many ever days it is, right, Ken? As far as announcements go, the Black Hat course is over. So whatever, right? Like if you missed it, you missed it. Hey, next time we are going to be doing a virtual course. It looks like for Global AppSec San Francisco sometime in October. We're still getting details on that as far as what it looks like from a virtual perspective, how long the course, and all that sort of information. So we will pull that back together, and we'll let people know once it solidifies. And it looks like Ken just had enough, so he's out. I think he's having some audio technical issues, so he'll jump back on. Besides that, this week, if you didn't know, there is DEF CON is going on. And it is free this year, right? So if you go to defcon.org, sign up, join the Discord. I'm pretty sure the first round of talks have actually already dropped via torrent. And they're on the media server for DEF CON, so you can go check those out. And then all the Hacker Tracker stuff that I do as far as scheduling events and all that is in there as well. So, I think that's it from an announcement perspective. We had Leif come on today to talk about a couple of different things that he's been working on over at Segment. And the way that they go about doing that, we thought it was fairly interesting. Apparently we're already getting comments, Leif, on your haircut or your lack of haircut, I guess is what we were saying. But anyway, Leif Dreizler from Segment. If you don't know who he is, welcome to the show, Leif. I should say. Happy to have you again.
Thanks. Yeah, I got to stay safe during COVID. Just limiting my interactions with the outside world, and part of that includes not getting a haircut, I guess. So
not getting a haircut. Yes.
Yeah. We'll see where it's at by the end of this thing.
By the end of the podcast? Like, is it growing that fast, or is it just
by the end of COVID?
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. So there was a couple of things that we mentioned, and Ken, welcome back. Thanks for shifting.
No worries.
There was a couple of things that we wanted to talk about today. The first was authentication, right? And I know you guys just shifted your whole authentication service, or you built some sort of new authentication service at Segment. So we'll dig into that shortly. But from a code review and applications perspective, authentication is something that always pops up. And so there's quite a few concerns that we have about it. So anyone that's listening, if you've got questions on different aspects of authentication, please feel free to jump in the Slack channel, and we'll try and answer them, or we'll get Leif to answer them. So let's talk through it a little bit, Leif. From an authentication service perspective, what is it that you were doing? Why is it that you brought that topic up? And we'll go from there.
Sure. So it was actually kind of rebuilding two services that already existed. We had one service that our application gateway would talk to directly, that would handle your authentication flow, whether you were coming in via SAML or username and password or MFA or any of those related things. And then there was a separate older service that was the service that actually handled with minting the JWTs and revoking them and checking if they're revoked. And so for the most part, all this logic did exist in these two services. But we wanted to combine them to make some upgrades to the way that we were handling JWTs, and also lay the foundation for some API work, because we wanted to centralize our authentication into a single service. And so whether somebody is authenticating programmatically via an API or whether they're authenticating via the web, we wanted everything to flow through this single service.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like a pretty standard like engineering process, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like we have a tendency to, yeah. Well, I mean, we build out an application, we get different services that line up, and then at some point we want to consolidate or we want to simplify how they're actually laid out. And the considerations that go into authentication are, I mean, it's one of the most important parts of an application, right? So there's a lot to consider there when you are rebuilding an authentication service. And I know that, you know, within Segment, you guys are very engineering focused. So how did you go about defining the kind of the requirements for building that authentication service outside of, hey, this is what we used to do, so we're going to do it in the new service? And then like security considerations, and talk about the process that you went through there.
Sure. So I actually had done some work about 1.5 years ago within one of our older authentication services when we added MFA. And so I was relatively familiar with the service that we were building on top of or kind of rewriting. And so it was kind of a natural choice from the security side to have me involved in the project. Whenever you're working on something of security importance, I think the best thing that you can do is have some really top-notch developers working on it, and that usually means going outside of the security team. And so we had to partner with a team that was also invested in this service, the team that owns it, and we wanted to pull them in to make sure that we were, you know, making the right engineering choices. We also had, you know, a shared set of goals. They wanted to do some work here to support the new API tokens. We wanted to make some changes to the way that we were handling the JWTs. And so there was a natural partnership between these two teams to collaboratively work on these features together. And so I think that finding a team that's willing to take on this shared goal with you is really important. Unless you're a team that actually has the resources to like build and maintain whole services on your own, which not every security team does, like nor should they have to. A lot of these are really engineering problems that have a security slant to them, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the security team should be the team that owns them. I don't really think of building security features as that different from any other feature.
No, yeah, and I would agree. I mean, and Ken, I wanted to ask you about that as well, right? Like, so Segment, it feels like that engineering culture, and I know that exists at GitHub as well, that like all these, there's different kind of like security services, I guess. But Segment is obviously probably a smaller team than GitHub, right? Just from a developer community perspective. So at GitHub, do you guys approach things similarly as far as building out security services? Is it assigned to like the AppSec team specifically, or is there a team in security that's like security engineering, or is it just sprinkled throughout the organization?
It used to be the AppSec team, called the AppSec team, but it was really like a small deviation of the AppSec team, which has now become formalized as of like, I don't even remember. It was within the last few years, we formalized moving the people that were on the AppSec team working on product features, security-centric product features, over to their own team called Product Security. But believe it or not, they have less to do with like the IAM or like single sign-on type bits. That's actually an entirely different team, which has very security-minded developers, but they're engineers. They could move to work on anything that they choose to, but they understand. Like, I don't know for Segment how you guys how it is for you, but for us, you know, there's so many different considerations that even making any minor changes could have a big impact. And so the people that are on those teams have been working in that ecosystem for a long time, and they know all those little weird dark corner and edge cases. And I'm not sure, if segment, if it's similar for you, or if it's more or
every
less
engineering organization.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's true.
You just need people who have been around for a while and like have seen what works and what doesn't work, and knows enough of the other systems to like understand like how things interact. But yeah, we have a kind of a like, I would say that, we're obviously a younger team than the GitHub security team, just by nature of being like a younger business. We have a similar division that's kind of starting between application and product security, and everybody's definition of product security is different. I would say that ours is actually pretty similar to GitHub, which isn't too surprising considering like the influence that we've gotten from like, being pretty close with the GitHub security team. So we actually draw a similar line where product security is more focused on the like tangible or indirectly tangible features that customers interact with. So I would consider like the login service something that's kind of both of those things. But something like MFA is, a little bit more direct. Like, you have to go and make a point to go turn on MFA. And then for application security, that's more focused around like training and tooling and like helping engineers be able to make good security decisions on their own. As well as like design reviews and threat models, and a lot of the things I think kind of fall into like the historic AppSec bucket, like running external pen test, that kind of thing. And so right now our application and product security teams are combined. Like people kind of float like freely between those two teams. But I think as like the org gets bigger, I wouldn't be surprised if we had like a similar split, like as you were describing at GitHub.
Yeah, since you brought up MFA, it's kind of funny. I actually saw this yesterday. Well, two things. For one, I saw this yesterday, which was interesting. I'll circle back in a second. But another thing you said was, you guys, we do, yeah, you're right. We've collaborated with your team. You've hooked me up with one of your team members to discuss threat modeling, so I could like try and pull from their knowledge and try and knowledge share there. So yeah, we've definitely collaborated quite a bit. Well, that goes both ways for sure. But I thought I saw this yesterday. Since you mentioned MFA, and since we're talking about authentication server, I guess MFA resets, they're no longer being processed for like free users, and I guess that makes sense, right? There is
the hardest part of MFA for sure, right? Is doing resets. I think in like B2B software, it's a little bit easier because you can delegate some of that responsibility to like the workspace or the organization, or whatever you want to call it, and you can kind of inherently use the trust that is combined between saying like, okay, hey, like this person's an admin for the workspace, like this person's part of their workspace, they work at the same company, like let's kind of go through our existing like business relationship with this organization to like help them get back into their account. But when it's just a solo person in an account, like you're trying to deliver MFA for the vast majority of people who are just trying to protect themselves like from credential stuffing. But then there's also the subset of your users that really do have to deal with like nation state actors and really sophisticated attackers trying to get access to their account, like people that would be willing to go do like a SIM swap or something like that. And so I get it. Like I get why they wouldn't want to deal with the MFA resets. I do kind of think that they should have taken a little bit more like varied approach on their approach to SMS. As they mentioned in the blog, like SMS delivery in other countries, isn't as reliable as in the United States. And so I understand that it isn't something where you can just say like, oh, well, if you want to back up, like sign up for SMS, because that isn't an option for everybody. But it does seem like that is a reasonable fallback for a lot of people in countries with good SMS delivery to say, okay, you can either use the app or you can use SMS. If you want to take that risk of using SMS MFA, which for most people isn't really a risk, but yeah.
So, and on that note, last time you had, oh, and by the way, yeah, like this is totally, so the reason I posted that GitLab article is it's absolutely like true. It's difficult to do these resets. It's difficult to do it. And also, by the way, we also do the same thing last time I checked, which is restricts SMS for MFA in certain country codes for, like you mentioned, specifically deliverability issues. In fact, we still get bug bounty submissions where they're like, yeah, but I could add it if I bypass the controls. We're like, yeah, that's not like that's not a concern. We're just trying to like,
you're only going to play yourself if,
exactly.
if the SMS doesn't get to you. It's like, yeah, it's something that, really only affects your own account.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're going to submit that as a bounty, don't, it's useless. But no, it's absolutely like, yeah, it's not at all about that one company. It's definitely about the fact that we all have these similar issues. Last time you were on, you talked about, as a prevention for credential stuffing, if I remember correctly, you guys engineered a solution where as you enter your credentials, it gives you just like a warning, right? It wasn't just a warning.
Yeah, we're hooked in with the Have I Been Pwned API. And so we'll tell users when they're signing up, like, hey, this is a breached password. And then we also use the ZXCVBN library from Dropbox, which doesn't make you do, password 1 exclamation mark to meet the requirements, but it instead like checks your password against like common passwords and like repeating characters. And it's obviously way more sophisticated than like 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, symbol, whatever. And it actually like meets all of the NIST guidelines if you just do those 2 things for the password stuff, because like NIST actually recommends that you check against like a list of known breach passwords. They recommend that you allow users to pick a set of like various password strategies. They recommend not doing like forced password rotations unless you think that there actually hasn't been a breach and stuff like that. So with that, and then the Have I Been Pwned library or API, I mean, you can do a pretty good job on helping users pick good passwords in a way that isn't annoying.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you came on, it was a pretty new feature, and so that's why I kind of wanted to double back and just see how that had all kind of panned out, because we hadn't really talked about it too much since then. So
I think it's been good. I mean, we haven't gotten complaints about it, and I mean, I guess it's kind of one of those things where even if we did, we probably wouldn't make changes just because we want to remain secure and practical, and I think it does meet those requirements.
Yeah. So was that part of the move that you made? Was the new service that you're building here?
No, this was actually stuff that we added previously. So that this was some of the stuff that like I had worked on before in the same like service that we ended up rebuilding. Okay. And that's what I mentioned like briefly earlier. Like I did have some experience working in this service. I helped build out like the back end for MFA. And so it was kind of revisiting and like rebuilding this service with some software engineers as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, from a like integration perspective, like you integrating with that team, and I don't know, we hear a lot about pushing left, right? As far as like all of the security
term.
team. Yeah, it's the hot whatever, right? But realistically, it sounds like that's what you've done in like helping guide the team out. And I wondered how that came about. I mean, I know you guys are very integrated with the engineering teams at Segment, but in this case, how did you go about that, right? Like it sounds like the features were there, but what was it that happened and spurred, and how did that go? Like what could somebody take away to implement that sort of an integration in their own organization if they don't have it?
Yeah, so I think at like the more thematic level, this came from our constant desire to want to become better software engineers on the security engineering team. And that's driven by us wanting to give good recommendations when we are reviewing design docs or reviewing code, or somebody asking us a question. Like the last thing that we want to do is like one of the security teams that you hear horror stories about where they're just like, oh, our security team's so dumb, like they gave us all these recommendations that don't even make sense and aren't practical and like are way too much work to implement. Like that's the last thing that we want to be. Yeah. And I think whatever part of security you're in, whether it's detection and response or cloud security or app security or GRC, or it doesn't really matter. Whichever teams you partner with the most closely, you're going to be a better partner to them the more you know about their workflow. And so I think if you're a security engineering person that's excited about DevSecOps or shifting left or whatever you want to call it, because it means that other teams are going to learn more about security responsibilities, you should be trying to learn more about these other teams as well, because it's not just like, oh, we're going to make everybody else do security stuff. It should also be about you learning like what those teams are doing as well.
Yeah, I know we had Abdullah Manowar on the podcast a little while ago. He talked a lot about this, about how when he joined, I think it's Appian, right? One of the first things that he was responsible, or what he had to do as a security person, was actually embed with an engineering team for the first couple of weeks and actually push some sort of source code, right? So he had to learn the app well enough that he could push some source code, fix a bug, whatever it was, as a part of, hey, you're learning to be one of our engineers, basically, before you go be a security person. We realize you're security, but that's the best way to embed yourself in an organization as it is.
I agree.
Yeah.
When I started at Segment, I did something similar. Like,
really,
I didn't have a lot of like professional software development experience. Like I did computer science in college, and like I had written some tooling when I was a consultant to like solve problems, but I'd never had to write something that like customers would depend on. And so a lot of the stuff that I did when I was like starting out at Segment was just fixing like small things that had gotten reported by our bug bounty program, like P3s and P4s, stuff that are valid issues, but like aren't necessarily going to be top of mind for like your average development team. And that was a great way to like learn about our app, learn about just development practices at Segment, and you still have to get your pull requests reviewed and stuff like that. So it was also a great way to meet people and learn from people that are like way better developers, and have them just shred your PR.
Yeah.
And then after a handful of times, you're like, okay, I actually like know most of this stuff now, and now I can help other people on my team. I think that's a big takeaway too, is like when you go and do these embedded projects, or really any learnings, like try to share this knowledge with your team. You had an engineering team that like took time to teach you a bunch of stuff. Don't just sequester that knowledge. Like try to help other people on your team learn things that were taught to you by other engineers, or even just anyone at your company, really. They don't have to be an engineer.
Yeah. And Lewis had a good comment here, right? People need to stop hiding in silos and get exposure to other organization functions. Security people need to be involved in engineering practices or failure. And that's,
I agree. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I would. That's what I was going to say too. Is I totally agree with that. Right. Like, in our course, we always talk about like, oh, you're looking at a code repository, but the first thing you got to do is get to know the application, right? And the same thing holds true for organizations, right? If you don't understand how the applications are built, or the politics that go into it, and how everyone communicates and builds the application itself, you're not going to be super effective as a security person, right? Like I just don't understand how you would actually function in that sort of an organization without getting to know those pieces. So what were you going to say, Leif?
Man, I still have.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I think it also goes beyond just writing code. A lot of the valuable things that I learned when embedding within these teams was actually not the code portion. Obviously, that was super valuable too, but it was also like helping write the design docs. So working with a product manager to actually create like the product requirements documents and the software design docs, and breaking these things up into, you know, sprints and tickets and all of that stuff. You learn a lot about like how software teams actually function beyond writing code. And so when we were talking about you know, building SCIM, one of the things that the product manager helped me with was tying our current SSO customers and the different identity providers that they were using to ARR. And so we, you know, figured out like, okay, you know, how many customers use Okta, how many customers use OneLogin, how many customers use Azure Active Directory, and then tying those customers to revenue, so that when we were going through the planning, we can say, okay, hey, this could have a meaningful impact on, I don't remember what the number was, like let's just say $100 million of revenue. And you just start thinking about things from a little bit more balanced perspective, and you start thinking about things in terms of business impact, customer impact, rather than, you know, just from like a pure security lens of like, oh, I want to help make our organization more secure, which is obviously very important, but your business doesn't exist to be secure. Your business exists to serve customers. And, you know, part of that is providing a secure piece of software, but it's certainly not the only reason why companies give you money.
Yeah, exactly. Ken, what were you going to say?
Oh, I don't really remember, but while I'm talking, I'll mention that I actually struggle currently with that, because I'll get embedded with teams for longer term projects as we've gone to more of a start an assessment with before any code's written, with an architecture design review sort of set of discussions, and then for the very big projects we'll do, like for instance later this afternoon I have a it's like, I think at this point it used to be weekly, every other weekly meeting with the team that's working on a big project. And so it's always a constant struggle, because, you know, I might have several teams doing different things, and it's like I really want to yeah, it's kind of like, I think what Leif was saying is I really want to be, because I see what they're going through, and I see the effort they're putting in, and I see the goals they're trying to meet, and the what it's going to do. Like, you know, hey, it's very concrete. If we build this, then this will happen, and it's very positive for the community. It's very easy to see how it's positive. So it's kind of hard when you have multiple teams, because your team, like AppSec team, still has our initiatives. We're still trying to push forward. We still have things we're trying to improve about our the way we operate, but you're also embedded with several other teams that are doing the same thing for whatever their product and feature is. And so for me, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the constant difficulty is figuring out, like, because I want to be with them, like I want to be a part of that team and the effort, but you know, it's like figuring out when to pull back, because you just can't. You're not on that team full time. You're like, they're on that product full time. You're on it when you can slice out and divvy up your week, and you know, so it's even as I guess what I'm saying is just that is a difficult thing to do long term. This experiment's been going on for about 6 months, and yeah, it's being embedded with the team's great, very difficult long term is what I'm trying to say. You have to balance, like with everything in life, right? There's always a balance to everything, but yeah,
our embeds have been like project focus, and so we'll usually have a joint OKR between the two teams, which helps ensure that both teams are investing resources into whatever this thing is. And so ours is usually for, you know, like a quarter-ish amount of time. But as you were saying, like just going through like the design process, you know, from the security side is one thing. And, you know, you get invested in like whatever this project is, like when you're reviewing the design docs and like going through the planning. It's also really valuable to go through that process as a software engineer. And so when we were writing up the design docs for these different things, I actually scheduled a security review with somebody from my team, and I was on the side of the developer with the other developers that were involved in the project. And so I think that is as many processes that you're making software engineering teams do. If you can go through as many of those as possible as a software engineer, it's going to help you refine like which parts of the process are actually necessary and which ones are bringing value versus ones that just like kind of seem like a good idea in theory and then don't actually really like translate to like meaningful improvements.
Yeah. There's another reason I think that's useful, and maybe it's very specific to me and that psychology, and not everybody goes to this. I don't know, but sometimes like for one that's on the top of my head, like a super big project for GitHub is I noticed that as I go along, like as I'm embedded with the team longer and longer, there are things that I start to, just because I see how technically difficult some initial requirements we put into place were when we didn't have all of the full information on like, you know, the different technology stacks and what issues we'd run into. Just like any engineering project, you run into stuff you didn't foresee. And so then you have to scale back some of those requirements. And I struggle with, because now I'm part of the team, I'm like, oh, we could just like forget this security thing because like it's not that big of a deal, you know? And then, you know, I'll talk to another person on the security team, and they'll be like, well, no, I think that's still fairly important. I wouldn't cut that out. I would maybe do this alternative. And I'm like, crap, I should have stood my ground or figured out an alternative in a better way. And that's I honestly think that's just a side effect of being embedded with the team. Is I'm more like, it's almost like I'm too empathetic or something like that, you know? And so what you're talking about, you kind of found a way to get around that effect. Maybe, I don't know again, I don't know if this is something that happens to anybody else.
No, I mean, I think you naturally like want the team to like you. And if you're embedded within the team, you obviously like need their help for, you know, code reviews, and like they probably know more about the technology than you do. And so like you want them to like you so that they help you. And so I could definitely see how it'd be easy to be like, oh, well, you know, let's just not do this thing that's annoying and difficult. Because people don't like doing stuff that's annoying and difficult. So
our engineers, man, they're really like cool to come up with like hard, difficult solutions, but it's sometimes more or less me looking at timelines being like, I know what you have to do now. And like some things might get pushed aside that like maybe shouldn't. And yeah, I mean, not from a security perspective, just from it's a constant like struggle, we'll say. I wanted to put Ken's question up here, by the way. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Seth, I'll read this real quick for those that are listening on audio. So sure. Ken Tollerhead, with regard to balance, how would you embed AppSec engineers that may not have a software or product engineering background into a team? Leif.
Yeah. So I think that kind of goes back to what I was originally talking about with like the steps that I took when I first joined Segment, is like focus on like fixing small things that like teams know that they probably should be fixing but aren't necessarily going to get prioritized, versus like trying to go in and build like a small feature or medium-sized feature, because it's usually easier to just like make some changes to some stuff based off of some other things that you can find in the code base. That being said, that does assume that you have like at least some base level of engineering experience. And I guess if somebody has, you know, never done like Hello World, you probably would need to take some sort of like course or do some sort of online learning or something like that, just to get that base understanding of programming, so that you know, like, you know, for loops and variable assignment and conditionals and like all the things that are kind of like the same building blocks across like every relatively normal language. But then once you have that, I think that like doing bug fixes and stuff like that is a good way to, you know, start learning how your organization builds software.
Yeah. I did want to go back to that. I'm glad that question came up, because I think it's an important aspect when you are moving into like the product security or the application security side. inside of an organization or with an application, like I've never learned more about an application than trying to fix vulnerabilities within it, right? Like how it's built, how the testing process works. Like I love saying like we're glorified QA testers as security people, and then like, but we do it poorly and we document, our documentation is crap, right? But that's realistically where we fit. If you're looking at a full-blown kind of like integration and SDLC, is security testing is just one of the integration tests that happen. So being able to build the application to fix some of the things like you did, Leif, is like goes a long way. And it'll also give you some empathy, to Ken's point, about what the developers go through when they get a P3 or a P4 that comes in from the bug bounty, right? Is it's like, hey, just because it looks simple on paper and it was really easy to exploit doesn't mean it's easy to fix. And it may take 2 to 3 weeks to actually go in, fix something, tweak it, and then there's conditionals and edge cases that you're going to end up dealing with. Like it's a difficult problem to solve. And if you've never tried to do it, I mean, even go and start with something like Juice Shop, right? Try and fix some of the vulnerabilities that are in there, if you've never done it before, to give you some sort of empathy on how that actually happens. And I mean, Ken and I have been through this in the past, trying to build like courses and things like that around vulnerable apps and fixing them and then testing. It's not an easy process, right?
You also realize how long fixing stuff takes. Like one of our really senior engineers at Segment, says pretty regularly, it's never just a quick fix. And it never is. Like that's like something that, I would think, a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, this seems like just such a quick fix. Like, why doesn't anyone fix this? It's like, nothing's a quick fix. It's like, maybe the fix is quick, but like, what about the time it took you to like context switch whatever you're working on, get all the development resources pulled down, get this thing built, you wrote tests, you deployed it to staging, you tested it there manually, you put up the PR, you thought everything was good, and then somebody that knows way more about the service than you was like, nah, this is like not how you're supposed to do that. You should do it this much better way. Obviously they would say it with a little bit more grace, but I'm summarizing.
Would they though?
Yeah. Plus, like, I don't know about you all, but for us, like it's both the engineers and AppSec team that tend to delve into all parts of the code base to see if the same issue is presented in a different way or in the same way, in other parts of the code. So there's also that effort, which I find to be pretty time consuming too, just making sure that it doesn't exist somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it can be pretty time intensive.
And obviously all that stuff gets faster the better you get. Like the amount of time it takes me to fix something small now versus 6 months or a year or 2 years ago, it's obviously much faster, but it's still like, how long is this thing actually going to take me? Is like probably like 2 hours minimum, like regardless of what it is, almost. And obviously, there's exceptions to that, but I feel like by the time that you do everything and, talk to people about what this thing is and get it deployed and check it once it's in prod and whatever, is like, I don't know, I feel like it kind of just takes like a couple hours minimum. And that's and Segment's like deployment and like engineering process is actually very, very fast. Like you can have something like merge deployed, like out to production, like within a handful of minutes. So this is definitely not a criticism of like our engineering tooling. Like our engineering tooling is actually absolutely top notch. It's more just like, the reflection on all of the times when I thought, oh, this will just be quick, and it like never was.
Yeah, well, also if that developer, even if it took them an hour to get everything up and running, that's an hour they weren't working on. Like you mentioned context switching, that's like, all right, so it's an hour they weren't working on that, but also maybe the next thing they had to do is run to an appointment or have a meeting or something,
or whatever.
Yeah, that completely interrupts the time they had allotted for their flow. Maybe they had a 2-hour window for flow, and like, 1 hour got eaten up, so they never really got into that other hour of flow. So that was pretty much useless. Probably just checking emails, doing some checklist items. It might be 1 hour, but it might throw the entire day off. So that's one thing. And I wanted to go back to Ken Toller's question just for a second, because I had like something that I don't know. Well, okay, two things. One, just because the AppSec engineer may have more of a dynamic testing background, less of a software development, maybe they don't understand code as well, doesn't mean that they can't be of serious help when it comes to the design, like especially talking about not only the initial sort of design discussions, but also when changes need to be made. It's very easy to at least ask questions like, okay, well, so you want to lax this standard up a bit. Okay, so what if I did this? Like, would this be possible? It's very easy. I think it's still very easy for a dynamic tester to, or somebody with that primary background to be like, hey, maybe I don't understand the software components all that well, but I do understand the web, and I do understand AppSec, and I do understand risks. So let me ask you this question, developer. Can this be done? My concern here would be these three things. Like, how are we addressing those? You still can have like a very productive conversation, but I think that the one thing you will come across is some level of feeling, maybe imposter syndrome. I don't think it's imposter syndrome. I think it's actually just a lack of confidence because you don't have that skill set, that software engineering skill set. So that would be a good reason to say to yourself, look, I need to go and learn this skill set. I mean, I am an AppSec. I should learn software engineering, and I should learn to code better in the long term. But I do think, again, up front, you can have like pretty productive conversations as long as you have confidence in yourself to say, I may not know software engineering inside and out, but I at least understand the web and standards, and I understand risks. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, and I don't think this is something that's like, oh, every security person like needs to know how to write code. I think this goes back to something I said briefly earlier, where it's about whichever teams you need to partner closely with as a security person, the more you know about that team, the more impactful you can be. And so maybe you're on the governance, risk, and compliance team. It's like, okay, how much do you know about like what the legal team does? How much do you know about what the sales team does? If you're on the cloud security team, like, how much, what do you know about like being an SRE or like, designing systems for whichever cloud provider you're in? We have to say Microsoft, right? Because again,
legally obligated.
Legally obligated. And it's for security engineering like that. I think in most cases does happen to be software engineering. And so I think that you're going to receive a huge benefit by like knowing how those teams work. And because I'm on the security engineering team, it's writing code because that's what software engineers do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to pull something out of that too, that you're talking about, right? Anytime that we do, well, okay, so we're building something from a security perspective, we're doing an assessment. We always have kind of this threat model risk profile that we do in our head, right? We try and define that more and more as we push left, Leif, right? But part of me thinks that we miss opportunities to actually go to those other groups at times and get their take on it, right? So, if you're building some portion of your site that has to do with legal, you should probably talk to them about the risks that are associated with that, right? And get an idea of what they're afraid of, as opposed to just like the software engineering team or the security engineering team. It may not be easy to pull those people together, but I'm pretty sure I know it would pay off in the long run because they're going to get involved at some point, right? If your feature has some sort of effect on GDPR or on PCI, then at some point it's going to be tested against that framework or that compliance framework or legal framework, what have you. So if they haven't been involved, just like security hasn't been involved in, site features, there's going to be a problem in the future, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reason why you do a design review is to try and identify risks. And when the security team's looking for this stuff, it's going to be vulnerabilities. But it's the same thing with having the legal team look at it. Like the legal team is also there to identify risk proactively in many cases. And so I think there's a lot of parallels between, legal and security, and even just another team. I mean, if it's something that, maybe it's like for your marketing site, Like the marketing team is going to be able to identify risks. They're probably not going to be security vulnerabilities, or probably not going to be like GDPR issues, but they're going to be able to identify risks in this end product it's going to help you not have to like rebuild things or cause damage to the brand, or the type of things that like they would be able to identify earlier.
Which is interesting, right? So this brings up a company that like I worked with in the past. It was a small startup that was doing very, very well, right? Bringing in a lot of money. I won't mention their name anyway, they had like the security team and the engineering team decided to change some features and disassemble some integrations with Facebook at the time, right? Like some of the ad spend that they were doing there and how that integration worked for getting customers from Facebook to the site itself. And they did this right before Thanksgiving. And basically what happened was, because they hadn't talked to anybody on the marketing side, they didn't talk to like the business, they just went ahead and made these changes. All of a sudden their revenue went from like basically dropped by about 60% over this critical time. And it had like huge effects on staffing levels, engineers, and everything, because they lost out on so much revenue over the end of the year, from Black Friday on through Christmas shopping, because of the changes that they made without talking to marketing, without talking to the business side of things. And so like there's kind of these cautionary tales that you have to be aware of, right? Anytime, and Leif, you spoke to this earlier, is getting that knowledge from the business side of what they're trying to do and what the business risk is. Right? Like we're having a lot of discussion about risk today, apparently, but business risk, as far as you make a change, you lose $100 million in revenue, that's going to affect your job and everyone's job that you work with.
Yeah, like if you think about that, think about this. Remote code execution seems really scary, right? Where does that compare to $100 million lost?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at all. Honestly, it doesn't. Like it's okay, cool, remote code execution, but critical issue, we'll get it patched, whatever. That's peanuts compared to $100 million. That's a real tangible mistake, and arguably way worse than a security issue.
Yeah,
to be fair. So
that'd have to be a pretty bad security issue to result in $100 million.
Yeah, I don't think any of the breaches have hit that, right? They may have, right? Experience.
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, but that's a tangible loss. And honestly, I'm surprised that someone didn't say something about that earlier. That's crazy. Yeah, I've never heard you tell that story before. That's a new one. I've never heard you talk about that. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's because it was like I heard about it through back channels with the guys that actually work there, and it was an interesting to watch because the company, like a privately owned company that was just really killing it, all of a sudden hard times, they're laying off engineers, and it was all due to this this engineering decision between security and them to cut off some stuff, and had a significant impact on the business. So,
oh yeah, and when you have mass layoffs, it takes a while to recover from that. That's not. I mean, you're talking about, because what brings in good engineers, which if you have great engineers, the rest of your organization can be great. That it can be. It has a better opportunity because your culture stems from your product, which stems from your engineering team. So that's something that's hard to recover from, because it's like, oh, I know so-and-so and so-and-so and this other person, and they all got laid off from that company. So that seems like a gamble. It's just like the company who I'm not going to publicly shame, but I did semi-privately publicly shame, who reached out to try and recruit for an AppSec team after they just laid off their entire AppSec team. It's like, no, how do you think that works? Like, you can't lay off your entire team because you guys hit a rough quarter and then be like, well, this quarter's looking up. I think a month later, I'll try and reach out and hire people. Like, what do you think you're going to get? You're going to get crickets. People are going to be pissed. Like, this is a small community. And anyways, sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent.
Having a good product just makes a lot of other jobs easier. Makes marketing easier, makes sales easier, makes recruiting easier. if you're a SaaS company and your product's good, it doesn't make the other parts of the organization easy by any means, but it definitely makes them easier than if your product was bad, for sure.
Yeah, money goes a long way. It does, man. If everything's good and you're able to like hire the best people in each department, it has a huge impact on the overall business,
Yep.
So what's the skim work you're doing? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that actually the way that I ended up on this episode was, I think you saw a tweet that I was talking about SSO, and somebody had mentioned that like SSO should be free, and I used to be squarely in the like SSO should be part of one of your basic plans, maybe not your free plan, but like something that's like relatively low cost. But after doing a bunch of authentication work, it's like SSO and this stuff kind of sucks, honestly. Like I get why companies charge money for this stuff. Is like, you have to build it, you have to maintain it. You have people opening up tickets because they, built their own SSO identity provider, and they're trying to integrate it with, your system. And like, there's a non-zero cost to your business. And like, I don't want to say that like, oh, every feature should be like piecemeal divided and you should have to, buy everything. I'm just saying I get it now. And I think that like, there is a reasonable balance. Like, I do think that, like a lot of companies, Segment included, like the price jump between like having SSO and not having SSO is pretty big. I do think that like you should have like some division there. Like, I think that your enterprise like SSO feature set should have all the bells and whistles of like, or I think like you can have a division between like basic SSO support, which I think is just basically like just-in-time provisioning and SAML. And then there's like this other set of features, which is, support for multiple identity providers, not using pre-built connectors, having like a list of excluded SSO users, supporting SCIM, that like can be part of like this different tier. And like, that's pretty defensible. SCIM is, for people that aren't familiar, it's a standard that covers like provisioning, deprovisioning, group mapping. You can also do like group creation, and like, renaming groups. It can update attributes, like the person's name within the app or whatever. And it really does provide a lot of functionality on top of your garden variety SSO implementation. Because typically, when you just-in-time provision somebody, they usually end up in a role that, doesn't have all the requirements that they need to do their job. When they leave the company, it's not something that like gets deprovisioned. So you still have to go in and like manually remove them, assuming your organization, cares about like removing people, which I guess a lot of companies probably just don't do. And so SCIM helps with all that stuff. Instead of it being like, okay, click the tile in Okta and then have somebody in the app go and like put you into the roles, and then have somebody manually go in and like remove you when, you leave the company or, switch roles or whatever. SCIM is great because it can provision you into the, whatever the app is. And then when you sign in, it's like, okay, I'm in the marketing group in our identity provider. That maps to, the marketing group within the service provider, which, service provider is just SSO language for an application. And so your first day is like, oh, I already have all the things I need to do my job. And then when you leave, the identity provider says, okay, delete this user from this thing. And it's a really great set of API endpoints that, are agreed upon. It's like get/users, post/users, get/groups, get/group/ID. I'd say that the spec itself is a little bit weird in terms of like, some of the choices that they've made and like the groupings and like the requests and the response bodies and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it does cover like the use cases that you would need to implement this kind of thing.
What was the impetus? How did you get involved with this project?
Part of it was because we wanted it for our own app. We like people to have a good first day at Segment. We don't want to have to go in and manually deprovision people when they leave, but it's also something that, like, as you start going after larger and larger customers, like, they're just gonna expect this to be part of your SSO implementation, I think. And rightly so. It's like, if they have 1,000 Segment end users, like, that's a nightmare. If you have to manually go in and be like, John just started, put him here. Susan just started, put her here. John got fired, get rid of him from the app, is like, that's such a pain. And like, there's already a protocol, or a standard, I guess. It's not protocol. There's already a standard that, outlines like this relationship between the identity provider and the service provider. And so, and like a lot of bigger apps have this, like Salesforce has this, or like, Slack has this, for example. And so I think that once you're somebody that has to administer all these apps, I imagine it's annoying when you get an app that doesn't have this. It's probably even more annoying when you have an app that doesn't support SSO. If I was a big company, I would just be like, we're not buying anything that doesn't support SSO. We're going to give you enough money that, you can go buy Auth0 or whatever and build SSO for us.
When Seth and I built an on-demand product together, we did a lot of like demos, and that was like probably one of the top questions every single time was, does this integrate with our single sign-on? That's like the number one question from it didn't need to be a big company. It's just, this, hey, can we integrate with our SSO? And, if you don't support that, it's going to be a big issue. So it's kind of like a requirement.
Yeah, it's also annoying for the end users too. I remember when I was at BugCrowd, like I helped roll out Okta there. And maybe we were at like 40 or 50 people at the time. And initially a bunch of the people on the sales team were like so resistant to like, this new thing that they had to go to. And then like literally a week later, they're like, why isn't this app in Okta? Why isn't this app in Okta? Why isn't this app in Okta? And it went from like, oh, this thing is new and I hate it instinctively, to this is so much easier. I log in one time and then I just click buttons to log into everything else. And I don't have to put in my username and password 20 times for the 20 different things that I need to log into. And so it's better for security because you don't have people doing usernames and passwords. You have centralized management, and your end users like it better because it's easier for them. Like, how many times in security is something better and easier? Like, anytime you have that combination, it's like you should invest in whatever that thing is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just a good business practice. It's interesting. Yeah. Like, so any technical hiccups there that you've run into? What are your technical? Oh, I'm sorry, Seth. Sound like you had a question.
No, go ahead. You're going right down that path. So ask.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So
I'm curious about the technical considerations.
This is stuff that we haven't actually released yet. It's still stuff that's like under like pre-release development. I would say that one of the challenges was just like kind of laying the foundation to support like the SCIM like requests and responses. This is built as part of like some other API work that's really cool and really awesome, and like trying to make use of a lot of modern development best practices. And so including this in something else that, was kind of like greenfield development and like had made its own set of assumptions led to some difficulties getting like the initial routes off the ground. But luckily, like the underlying functionality for like management of like these groups and users and things like that is something that was already being handled by another team. And so this was mostly just like building on top of their work, and the like underlying functionality for like getting a group or getting all the groups already existed. It was just a matter of like massaging the data into the format that SCIM defines as part of the like 2 RFCs. So luckily engineering teams had done like the heavy lifting of like actually making this data available, and the stuff that I'm doing is kind of just like the research into the standards, and then the implementation of like actually taking the data from like the format that it's stored within Segment and arranging it into the form that like SCIM is expecting it to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I got all distracted because, looked up the RFC for SCIM, and I'm like, oh, that's why I always see the /me, right? Like in the different endpoints when I'm looking at APIs. Like I didn't connect those dots before, but there's a lot of good functionality in there just from a strict, if it supports SCIM, that this exists, right?
Yeah. So you should also look, if anybody is implementing this, also look at 7643. You need to look at both of them, because a lot of the like schema definitions and additional information is in the other RFC. And if you, I think you would naturally come across it. I think it would be hard not to, but yeah, the other one is also worth looking into. Would arguably say more important initially, just to get a good understanding of like the different attributes. Read RFCs. They're mad boring, and they're surprisingly hard to copy and paste for something that is like literally just plain text, because it just keeps all the like weird new lines and all that stuff. But it is generally put together by a group of people that are smarter than you, or at least smarter than me. And so, they've come up with a lot of things that are probably there for good reason. It was the same thing when I was working in the authentication service. We had some things that like, they weren't security or functionality problems. Like everything worked totally fine, but they just deviated from the JWT standard. And then when we were trying to translate the work from the older Go service to the newer TypeScript service, the library we were using was like, this stuff isn't right. Like your timestamps are in nanoseconds. Why are they in nanoseconds? They're supposed to be in seconds. And so there's just like weird stuff that you have to deal with if you deviate from this thing that is standard. And so, it's probably like the most boring piece of advice I'll give on this podcast, but like, if there's an RFC associated with what you're working on, try to read as much of it as you can get through, because it'll pay dividends later for sure.
Yeah. The one thing I noticed on RFCs is that, go ahead, Ken. You wanted to.
Oh, no, I was just going to post to this, like, for this feature with the Oauth 2 device authorization flow, it's very much like, how when you go to your, your Apple TV or something, and you have to, go to /activate and, activate your device for whatever, whatever, like HBO or Showtime or whatever you've got on there. This is essentially that standard. I've just linked to the change log, not to the actual RFC. I don't know. Yeah, I think here it is. Here's the RFC. So it's from that link. Anyways, when it came to like figuring out additional security controls, my boss and I were brainstorming, and we're like, let's just go through that RFC standard, really read through it. And actually, it gave a few like anti-social engineering tips, and like some really good. And then Auth0 had a great blog post, which we were able to reference based off this RFC. But yeah, just reading through the RFC actually gave us a couple ideas, which we passed on to developer of this, and then he implemented. And now I feel like it's a more secure product just because we read that advice in the RFC. So
there's good stuff in there.
No, there is. And that's what I wanted to say is like, you start reading those RFCs and you realize that they think about the edge cases. They think about the risks as they're building out those standards. It's not just a strict specification, but they talk about a lot of that, and you'll get some really good information. So if you don't implement to the standard, sometimes you will introduce pitfalls and bugs and vulnerabilities that should have been covered because they were in the standard for a specific reason, right?
As Ken said, you'll also learn about cool stuff that's like worth implementing that you wouldn't have thought of in your initial design. There were a couple really good parts of the JWT standard that made a huge difference for us. Two of them were the key ID, which is one of the headers, so that like anything before that first period in the JWT. And a key ID is great because then if you ever have a situation where you need to change the key, you can figure out from the header which key you should be using to validate the JWT, instead of saying like, oh, did it work with this key? Nope, let's try this other one. The key ID is also great because it allows you to rely on less information from the JWT, which is essentially attacker controlled until you validated it. And so we do put the algorithm in the header still, but we actually don't trust the algorithm in the header in our JWTs. We look up which algorithm to use on the back end based on the key ID. Because if you have the algorithm in the header, the attacker could change the algorithm to something else. And then if you use that to validate the key, it could undermine your whole key signing process. So if you were using public, or let's say you're using public key crypto to sign your JWT, and somehow your public key got leaked, and you're like, whatever, it's just like, the public key that got leaked. Doesn't really matter. But if an attacker got that and signed it with a symmetric algorithm, then you could be in trouble because it isn't following like the algorithm that you use to sign it. And so that was one that was really cool. Another one is the JTI, which is it's like a unique identifier for that instance of the JWT. And the JTI is great because now if you want to do a revocation list, it's easy. You just store the JTI. You don't have to store the whole JWT. If you want to do rate limiting based off of the JWT, don't have to store the JWT. You just store the JTI. And the JTI doesn't have any value to an attacker. The JTI is just a single claim in that between that second and third period in the JWT that serves as a unique identifier, which represents that JWT as a whole. And so if you're designing a new system, or you have an opportunity to retrofit an older system that is using JWTs, you should definitely look into adding a JTI claim.
Yeah, and I could have swore like if you didn't JWT signing library, if you provided like a none algorithm, you've completely compromised the key signing at that point. Going back to what you're saying about them taking the algorithm from the header is what I'm referencing, not the JTI, obviously, JTID.
You kind of broke up, Seth. Did you hear that question?
Yeah, ask it one more time.
It's all good. Nah, it's all good. Don't even worry about it. It's not super relevant and important. I actually got to get going, so
okay,
I'm gonna start wrapping it up. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to learn about JWTs, would definitely recommend checking out Louis' talk from AppSec California. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's the Pen Tester Lab guy, and his handle on Twitter is SNYFF. But I think there's only one JWT talk from a guy named Louis from AppSec California earlier this year.
Niffin Egger?
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
I don't know.
I don't know how to pronounce it. I wasn't even going to try. Speaking of other Louis, the Louis from Segment says he wants his T-shirt, and I was specifically instructed to remind you of that. That's a good point. Publicly.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I have been for anybody listening. I'm so sorry. I suck. I need to go get my all I need to do is print all the addresses and go to the post office. That's all I need to do. I stink at this, and I keep forgetting about it because my memory is shot because I'm old and, maybe not as old as Seth, but,
blah, blah, blah.
Almost there. Talking about a few years difference. Very, very close, but yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize. It's the best I can do.
I'll put a reminder on his calendar for it. Okay, Leif.
The thing is, I have like 2 boxes full of shirts. I need to get rid of them. It's actually a pain for me. So yeah, it needs to be done. All right.
Sweet. Well,
thanks,
Leif. Yeah, thanks for coming back on today. And yeah, having the discussion. Right. I know we That's the most times we've referenced like RFCs on the podcast, I'm pretty sure. So awesome.
Yeah, if you had told me 3 years ago, I'd be touting RFC reading. I don't know if I would have believed you, but it's good stuff.
Here we are. Yeah.
Here we are.
Appreciate it. And then we'll catch everybody online. We'll get this one posted to all the podcast places. And find us online if you've got questions. Leif, anything, any place that people can contact you or anywhere that you'll be that they can actually reach out?
So there's nowhere physical I will be for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Not giving away my home address, but my Twitter DMs are open. I should be mentioned in this episode's like notes on Twitter or whatever. So yeah, just reach out, and if you have questions or want to chat or whatever, I'm happy to send some messages back and forth.
Cool. Appreciate it. All right. Well then, thanks for coming on again, and we'll talk to everybody in the next week. I believe we've got other people on. So
all right, thanks for having me.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.